So good evening, everybody, participants in this webinar tonight and those who will be listening to it later. I'm Kim Dunphy, President of the Dance Movement Therapy Association, and I'm hosting this webinar tonight with my colleague Sandra Luffenberger, who's both Secretary and Governance Committee Convener. And both Sandra and I and Dr. Sally Denning were members of the Competency Committee who developed these competencies we're discussing tonight. But before we begin, I'd like to commence our session tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet tonight. In my own case, that's the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And then all of you are in different, some of you in different countries, but acknowledging traditional owners, custodians of the land in which you're placed, and the learnings we have from that custodianship of the land, and then also of our own profession, acknowledging the ancestors of dance movement therapy on whose shoulders our current practice is developing. So recognising we don't come from nowhere in this work tonight. So I'm going to start by introducing the competency standards, and how I'm going to do that is share my screen so you can see this document. And here's our document, which is available on the website. I'm just going to see if I can get rid of that. There we go. Get rid of that. So here's our document available on the DTAA website, and just begin by introducing this page, which explains what are competency standards. So competency standards are, in here we've got an important benchmark for all professions, used to assess skills and knowledge that a professional must demonstrate in their workplace to be deemed competent. So they define the requirements for effective workplace performance of dance movement therapists in Australasia and underpin criteria for professional membership. They also provide a platform for defining learning outcomes and assessment benchmark for dance movement therapy training. So they're of particular significance for trainers, but also for professionals to know what it is that we are claiming professionals can do. And there are also two groups who are not mentioned there, and we're thinking our next edition of this will also mention that they're significant for employers because they tell employers what they might expect dance therapists have the capacity to do, what is the scope of work dance therapists could do, and then also the general public. So people who are wanting to know, well, what do dance movement therapists do? What should they be competent to do? Can look at this document and see that. And I'm going to just whiz us down to the glossary. So part of the task tonight, and why we haven't made slides, is that we're wanting people to become familiar with this document. Here is a definition which we have from ASQA, which is the Skills Training Authority for the National Government in Australia, defining competency as the consistent application of knowledge and skill to the standard of performance required in the workplace. It embodies the ability to transfer and apply skills and knowledge to new situations and environments. So that's kind of nice that that word embodiment is there too, which for us dance therapists. And we've chosen that definition of competency because ASQA is significant in the Australian context as our national authority for training. But our colleagues in other countries in New Zealand and other countries in the Australasia region would have their own national training body who would have presumably a definition of competency. So going back, excuse me, close your eyes if you get a bit dizzy while I whiz back up here. The competency standards, I did some homework last night looking at competencies, or what other professions are using competency standards, and it's looking to me like it's very ubiquitous. So other professions, OT, so occupational therapists, had their first set of training standards in the late 1990s, and they'd revised them in 2017. Paramedics, midwives, architects, a whole range of professions have competency standards that their members and the employers and training bodies pay attention to. So it's a significant advancement for dance movement therapy to have these, so that we are saying to other professions, we are like you in being able to explicate this idea of what we should be competent to do. And I'll just briefly introduce how we got these standards, and then hand over to Sandra to begin to introduce them. So in 2000, the DTAA they weren't exactly competency standards, but the idea of guiding principles for dance movement therapists in Australia. So we have had a document since 2000. And then we, last year when we began work responding to we were beginning a project to get dance movement therapy recognised by the NDIS as a modality that could be funded as a recognised modality. And one of the things that became apparent to us, or the NDIS was asking for, was, well, what do dance movement therapists do? And so we need both competency standards and a scope of practice to make that clear. And that's why that was the catalyst for this work. And we began the process by looking at other competency standards. And actually, interestingly, internationally, there were no other professional associations for dance movement therapy that we found that have competency standards. So that was an interesting finding. So it may be that we are the first dance movement therapy association in the world to explicate competency standards. But we did draw on the American Association have standards for education and training. So we were informed by that, as well as other methods, literature review. We consulted with dance movement therapists, and that included 2 discussions at AGMs in 2017 and before, and a very brief discussion at the 2008 AGM. And then we had functional analysis with DTAM members, including one that happened at the 2007 AGM, where members were asked to talk about the broad range of activities they do. And then we had a range of responses to draft documents. And then we had some critical incident interviews with practicing dance movement therapists. And it was this committee of 3, myself, Sally Denning and Sandra Laffenberger, who developed these competency standards, but we were in consultation with members throughout that time, including particularly the leading group of the DTA, which was called the General Committee at the time. And then we distributed them to members for comment or consideration, and then endorsed them at the meeting AGM in 2018. And the intention at that time was not that this was the just checking whoever's got their microphone on, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself. So once someone's joined us, thank you. And then the idea that these are not set in stone, that this is the first iteration of those, and we will continue to refine them so that they reflect the ongoing development of the profession, but also new ideas that come up in discussion with people across the profession and elsewhere. And then we've got 7 categories of competencies that we're going to introduce to you in the next little while. But I think just before we do that, I might invite any questions or comments just about that first kind of introduction, the idea of competencies, the background and how we got to them. So if there's anybody who's got a specific question they might like to ask now about that before we get on to the content, please feel free to do that. And if you're asking a question, you'll need to unmute yourself. And I'm just going to check the chat function in case there's anybody who I've muted that's wanting to talk. So if you can see the chat function in the bottom corner there, if there's anybody who needs to type into that, please do. Okay, well, that's looking like perhaps we're ready to go on to the next section, and we can certainly come back. So if there's a question that arises in this conversation, hold it now and we'll come back at the end. So if there's anything you want to talk about competencies generally, we can do that also at the end. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Sandra Laffenberger, who's going to introduce our first section, which we're actually going to call domain later on. So dance movement therapy knowledge is one domain. Just checking everybody can read that nicely. I've just thought to expand the text a little bit so you can see that. I'm handing over to you, Sandra.
So before I start on the specifics of this first domain, I guess I want to just reiterate, it was in sort of the bottom of the last slide, is that we looked at these, we tried to group the competencies. We had hundreds and hundreds of competencies, and we decided to group them into 7 major areas of knowledge, and well, not knowledge and application. And so as you'll see, we go through them, they break down to be dance movement therapy specific knowledge, and then the key issue of dance, and then the broader issue of body movement, that's the third one. And then we get into things that are more practical applications, such as therapeutic knowledge and skills, the dance, what we actually do in practice, and then research, and of course professional practice, all the ethical and personal care that we need. So we felt that these 7 broad categories represented the major kind of concepts that we would need covered. But yes, anyhow, the other thing that I want to say before, maybe this will head off a few questions, because I think there's often a huge confusion. A competency is what your student, or what the dance therapist, if you're a training organization, dance therapist, if you're an employer, or what you should be able to do. Okay, that's the key word, what you should be able to do as a result of what you've learned. It is not what you will learn. Okay, so it's not content, it's about what you can be able to demonstrate, show, exhibit, etc. So it's about the practical, what you will do. And I think if you keep that in mind, then questions about how come we don't have certain topics in here or whatever may start to make more sense, or maybe not even, anyhow, you'll understand why they aren't in there so specifically. So I'm going to go through this first one, and if you want to scroll it up, Kim. The first major domain is the knowledge of dance movement therapy, a sort of a general knowledge. And there's 2 major competencies. We've always highlighted them. You'll see them highlighted in the sort of purpley red. And the first one is about your knowledge of dance as a therapeutic modality, both historically and cross-culturally. And the second one is about the emergence of dance movement therapy. Okay, and it has emerged in the Western world as a profession, which is what we're interested in, and dance as a therapeutic modality has existed across cultures and throughout history. So then the specifics underneath, they simply point out key things that you need to know about each one of these key competencies. So for the first one, you need to understand or be able to demonstrate your knowledge of historical practices. Second one is about contemporary use of dance as a therapeutic practice. And the third one, particularly specific to Australia, the healing dance practices of Indigenous peoples. Then the second competency or major competency, I never know quite how to subdivide these, is about dance movement therapy in specific. So pretty much maybe since the 1940s, if we want, but it depends on how you develop your content. So that's up to you. But it's about understanding the origins of dance therapy as an actual profession, the key pioneers of dance therapy and what they contributed to our theory, the dance movement therapy movement and profession in Australasia, and then, of course, the underlying historical and theoretical function of improvised movement, which is really foundational to to the dance movement therapy knowledge. So that's the first block. I guess Kim will open it up to any questions right here, but remember, this is about what you must demonstrate based on what you have learned in the course that you studied in.
Thank you, Sandra. And thank you for explicating the idea of competency as opposed to knowledge or information or some other aspect of what we might have from our training, either our initial training or any other professional development or learning we do during our careers. So I invite any comments or questions just on this very first domain about dance movement therapy knowledge. And if you want to say something, remember to unmute yourself. Good. All right. Well, let's go on. And remembering that we can come back to, in our last conversation, we can come back to any questions about any aspect of this. So I'm going to take us through the second domain. And I'm just going to make a little gap there so that's a bit easier to see. And this is the use of dance skills. So as a dance movement therapist, we need to have technical skills in dance and movement to support therapeutic practice. And this includes 4 sub-elements. So the idea that we need to have, we can utilize, so we can access the full range of available movement across all best components. So body, effort, shape, and space components. So the idea that we, as dance movement therapists, have a full range of movement capacity that we can utilize in our practice. We have proficiency in dance styles to support therapeutic practice. So you can see that we're not saying specifically what dance styles they might be, and that might be for a range of reasons, including that we might have culturally specific dance styles that might be relevant for our practice, or age specific. We might use beatbox or hip hop dancing if we're working with young people, or ballroom dancing with older adults. And then very fundamental to dance therapy, the idea of skills in movement improvisation to support therapeutic practice. And then finally, the idea that we are using dance movement or dance and movement to stimulate creativity and expressivity in our clients. So that's really the fundamental reason for using dance and movement. We're not training people to be dancers. We're not training them in dance skills, but we are wanting to stimulate creativity and expressivity in our clients. So I'm just going to hold it there. So we've come to the end of our second of 7 domains of competence, and invite anybody who might like to ask a question or make a comment at this point. Okay, well, we'll go on, and then again, remembering we can come back to these specific topics a little later on. So I'm now going to hand back to Sandra. Luckily, because this is her area as a CMC, LMA expert, body in movement. Sandra.
So this domain is related to, beyond dance, it's the larger area of the body itself and the moving body. And it's about, again, knowledge that that the dance therapist needs to be able to apply. So the first one is about key movement frameworks. Now, yeah, this one we're still chewing on a bit, perhaps, but certainly key movement frameworks that help support therapeutic practice could be considered Bartenia fundamentals, Peggy Hackney's patterns of connectivity, possibly body-mind centering. And Kim, is it all right if I say that we have considered that what we would like to add to this is possibly one regarding other culturally appropriate movement frameworks. So this might cover if there was a movement framework that came out of African practice or Asian practice or indigenous practice, that it's not excluded, but it would be incorporated. So, yeah, thanks to some previous questions, we've recognized that perhaps this one needs to be expanded into with a fourth sub-element. The body and movement, obviously, we also need to know about the science of the body and movement. So the second major second competency is around anatomy, physiology, and the knowledge of biomechanics. You will note that we don't, in the old days, I think we might have said kinesiology. We're quite clear to say biomechanics at the moment, because unfortunately kinesiology is also a body work modality, and we don't want that confusion. We don't want muscle testing. We're not talking about that. We want to know about the mechanics of human movement, the ability to recognize and describe key muscular skeletal landmarks, anatomical features, and physiological processes, and also the anatomy, or sufficient knowledge of the anatomy, that movement and our nervous system, there is an understanding of that. The third competency is around the ability to use movement, our developmental movement, to underpin practice. So there's an important need to be able to apply developmental movement theory. We'll get to some of that in number 4. Developmental movement theory, and also understand how family, environment, culture, and possibly other systems that we have not yet identified can impact on the person's movement preferences. So we need a theoretical understanding of how complex movement and movement patterns result from that. And then most importantly in my book, that there is this application and ability to use for both observation and analysis using the Laban-Bartenieff movement system. If you've known it in the past as LMA, that's same thing. It's just that it's now considered Laban-Bartenieff in order to honor Irmgard and her contributions. So the ability to use LBMS to document, describe, communicate body patterns, and as well as relational movement patterns. So we'll pause here and see if there's any questions.
I have a question.
Hi, Virginia.
Hi. Just going back to 3.1.
Virginia, do you want to identify yourself for the recording?
What's the hat you're wearing in this with this question?
I'm a practitioner. I'm a private practitioner in dance movement therapy in mental health, and yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. So when we call these as competencies, are we expecting people to have one of those? Is that what you mean by having those ones specifically defined?
That's a good question, Virginia. And actually, we had a big discussion about this yesterday. When we had put them in here, we were thinking of these as systems, models that all dance therapists should know about. And one thing we haven't actually mentioned very clearly here is this idea of competencies is what a basic beginner level or basic level dance movement therapist should be able to do. And because this topic has come up now twice in comments, we're wondering whether we might want to be changing that to say that, for example, a beginner or basic level dance movement therapist perhaps might not necessarily be able to utilize body-mind centering, but recognizes body-mind centering as a system that enhances movement capacity. So it might be that not all dance therapists need to have competency in body-mind centering, but we decided that we wouldn't want to have even a beginning dance movement therapist who's not heard of body-mind centering, so doesn't know what it is. So that might be something we adjust, and perhaps with even all three of those, that we might consider them that all dance movement therapists might not necessarily be able to utilize or apply those, but we thought that we would not want to have a dance movement therapist that hasn't heard of those and doesn't recognize them for their function.
Okay, so that just needs to be clearer there.
Yeah, well, we actually need to, if that's what we decide to do, and maybe by the end of the session tonight, we might come to some kind of agreement. And I think that's looking where we might go. So we might adjust that to distinguish between what a dance movement therapist must at least be aware of as distinguished from that they have the capacity to do.
We have to make sure, however, Kim, sorry to interrupt you, words like awareness of are not competency words. We have to have something like we have to have quite a more active verb.
Yeah.
And a measurable, these need to be measurable verbs, and because these are the performance standards, if you will, against which you're going to check your students. So anyhow, so it's going to need to be more than just awareness. It's going to have to be something.
And knowledge of or something. Yeah, access of knowledge of or something like that.
Yeah.
So is there another question?
Just checking that addresses what might have been coming up for you there, Virginia.
Yeah, I just think the wording, I mean, it makes me feel a little anxious, because while I know of, like I've done some workshops in body mind centering, I wouldn't like someone to say, would you come and run a workshop on that for me? Like I couldn't do that.
We recognize that, and in the same way, maybe you wouldn't actually run a Bartania fundamental workshop either.
No, I wouldn't know how
but you would have some basic awareness of what this system might offer, and maybe a few skills.
Yeah. Well, we did that as part of, the grad dip, but
it would be more on that level, because this is beginner level.
Yeah. So it just needs to be clearer, I think. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's a change from that, because we had, when we were thinking about this, we were thinking, well, these are fundamental. But that, as the conversation has gone on, we're realizing, it would be possible, for example, if you were an Indigenous dance movement therapist, that you might be informed by Indigenous models of understanding movement that might not be, and so these are, and actually the comment from Jane Revshorgi, which stimulated this conversation, was these are very Western focused models, and we have to be remembering that a lot of these ideas have come from America, which is both, terrific that we have this impetus, but we also have to be recognizing that there's, a range of ways of knowing in the world and knowledge systems that don't necessarily always need to privilege American ideas. And so, and then even if they do privilege American ideas, that we can't be expected to know all of them. So thank you for those people who've suggested additional words there, and we'll take those back and make sure that we are thoughtful about those. And then what our plan with this is that we would present the next version of this at the AGM. So we'll go away with the ideas discussed tonight and then bring them forward again.
Can I just add one more comment? Sorry.
Yeah.
Just wondering, and I won't open this up to discussion because we're running out of time, but just there are other things like Anna Halperin's approach, and just I'm wondering how we keep it broad enough so that people who've come through that training or other types of training can have, that's recognised too. I don't know how you do that, like it's so big, but yeah, just interested in those choices.
Yeah.
So can I answer? So they're not excluded. That's again a content decision. I just noticed a question from Lily about what about KMP. Many of those, they are adjunct. They're the same way we might go and do a continuing ed or a professional development and learn something. They're not excluded at all from these competencies because we're not naming content, and perhaps, as we've realized, we perhaps have overnamed content here, and that's the issue. However, the Laban system is basic to dance therapy worldwide, so that's why the at least Bartenieff and LBMS is in there. But we realized last night or the other night that we could change this 3.1 and broaden the idea of movement frameworks so that other ones could sit under there, but they will not be named because that will be training program specific. Is that all right?
Can I just say something around all that?
Thank you, Connor.
Because I had an issue also with the BMC, even though I come from America, I've had exposure and even did a weekend with Bonnie because, is it more integrated into the language of dance therapy or not? Because it's its own thing. And then, of course, when I studied, we looked at the current forms that used movement, say we were looking at yoga or bioenergetics or, things like that to kind of compare them to dance therapy. So, and people did Alexander technique or Feldenkrais. So there's a lot of body and form practices that some dance therapists may know, but some don't. So
yeah,
perhaps,
no, that's Connor, not to cut you short, but we are running out of time. So that is why we are doing what we said. Kim, can I throw a spanner in the work here, please? Could I do number 4 so that you can do number 6? If you can do 5 and 6, I'll do number 4.
Okay.
Is that just because I want you to do the research one? And also, I think I probably influence this one a lot. So, so are we moving on to number 4?
We're moving on to number 4, yes. And any other questions we'll address in our last bit of time.
Okay. So this is the actual therapeutic knowledge unit. And again, they are named in terms of competencies and not content, but I tried to break things down so that the concepts or the ideas were under key different areas. So the first one is about cognitive and psychosocial development, those theories. And those are the lifespan theories, the theory of mind, as you can see in number 4.1.3. There's memory, many of these cognitive mind theories. Again, we had a lovely question from Jane Rafshagi about what about Freud's ideas and what about this? They can fit under here. How you choose to do theory of mind is depending on your program. So these are, so they're quite broad. They're probably more broad than you may think. The second one is, of course, important about the neuroscientific theories. These are very, well, they're kind of what excites people about dance therapy, and they're getting a lot of headlines, but it's important that we can talk about them. So we do need a dance therapist to understand key and be able to demonstrate their understanding of key principles like, or key ideas like neuroplasticity and how it affects, or how it's related to interventions, and to understand what mirror neurons are, and understand stress and trauma responses, and understand autonomic nervous system ideas such as the window of tolerance. Again, how you teach these or what you use, it's just that these are important things that are currently, that we felt that a dance therapist currently needs to be able to communicate and apply. Then there's theories relevant to the affective domain, that is emotion. There's a lot of work out there on affect theory, and it's very important to dance therapy because we work with expression and expression of emotion. So that's where this domain came out of. It's quite, I would say it's very unique. We didn't find it in anybody else's, but we felt that it's quite related to trauma and the trauma work that sometimes we may be leading into, but also it's key to dance therapy because it's about expression of emotion. The fourth one is about psychotherapeutic theories. And again, the psychotherapeutic theories that may help the dance therapist understand relational dynamics as well as nonverbal communication. But we're not specifying, does it need to be Freud, does it need to be Jung, does it need to be Klein, or does it need to be CBT? It's not specified. They just have to be able to explain or provide an understanding of relational dynamics and nonverbal communication. Separate from that is the counseling theories, which are more about family systems, group dynamics, person-centered approaches, and also an understanding of counseling techniques and how they relate to a therapeutic relationship. And then, of course, finally down there, more specifically, key aspects of dance movement therapy theory, such as empathy and attunement, how the theoretical components that need to be in a program and in a session. If you can read the rest of them, shared movement experiences, how do they provide expression, or how do they promote insight and integration, verbal interventions, meaning making of nonverbal learning, and of course the therapist's role. So again, they're not very specific, but each one of you who do represent a program here, I'm almost positive you have developed your understanding and your philosophy. And yeah, so I won't say any more. We'll open it up, and then I can throw it back to Kim.
Actually, I think what we might do, I'm just mindful of our time, Sandra. I think we
Okay.
might
Keep going.
And then we'll have to save our questions discussion for a more general one because we need to finish in time. So this one is dance movement therapy practice. And so this is about how we are as dance movement therapists in our practice. And these are things that are fairly standard and probably not controversial at all. The idea that we promote a therapeutic relationship using dance and movement, that dance is the expressive medium that we use to extend clients' movement capacity. So that distinguishes us from psychomotor therapists or physiotherapists or others who might be wanting to extend clients' movement capacity. We assess the client, and there's a range of ways that we might do that. And then we develop dance movement therapy plans for our clients. So that's our process of being effective practitioners by addressing client needs, being thoughtful about client needs. We monitor and review their progress against the plan. We implement interventions, and then we've got a range of aspects here, which is the dance and movement, choreography, symbols and imagery, and other art forms. We facilitate groups, and we demonstrate application of systems and tools for observation, analysis, and assessment. And just responding to the, that's the end of my section there. So just responding to question before about KMP. So this would be the area, we haven't specified KMP, but it might be, this is a system for movement observation, analysis and assessment. So this doesn't preclude using KMP or any other type of assessment approach, but so we're asking people that dance movement therapists have capacity for observation, analysis and assessment.
I think what we are saying, though, just to quickly interrupt, is that we would want the Laban system to be the primary tool, and then any additional one is great.
Yeah, and actually I see that we don't specify other systems there, so we might...
So make a note of that.
Okay. So this is not exclusively, so LMBS is fundamental, LMBS LMA is fundamental, and then there might be other systems, so including KMP and others. So just pushing on, Sandra, you
can do this one.
Research, so now I'm going to do research.
Yep.
A relatively short one. So we, in a dance movement therapist at a basic level doesn't need to have capacity to do research, but they need to understand the role of research, to utilize evidence to inform their practice, to know how to search a literature and understand what it's saying and how this might influence their practice, and then ensuring ethical publication and research practice. So if they are doing anything, that they're doing things like having informed consent and managing their data appropriately. So this is something that is pretty important, but it's not a major part of a beginning dance movement therapist's work. So we're going to whiz on now to the last section, and then we'll open up for discussion and questions. So handing over to Sandra.
Oh, okay. These are all things that are, of course, very basic to professional practice and the idea of professionalism in practice. So, yeah, again, we'll just sort of whiz through them and let you read them. But the first one I think is kind of interesting simply because it points out that we can be able to recognize our clinical limitations and our ability to seek supervision or refer out. It's also about collegial relationships. It's about advocacy and the ability to communicate clearly about dance therapy to stakeholders and other professions. This is really, really important for promoting our whole profession and professionalism. And then we get down to the nitty-gritty of data and management of records, confidentiality, those kind of things. Client safety is the third one. Obviously, workplace safety and all of the other issues around that are critical. Ethical practice. Most importantly, abiding by DTAA's Code of Ethics, which is under development, right, Connor? But also many other things that add to ethical practice, such as reflective approach, decision making that addresses ethical concerns, etc. And then finally, this mindful and self-aware practice. This is in the area basically of self-care and of burnout prevention, but to the items that we'd hope a dance therapist would demonstrate to show that they really have mindfulness about what they do, and they are continually developing their own awareness. So it includes self-care, it includes understanding of movement preferences, it's an understanding of your own self and self-regulation. So those kind of capacities. And yeah, that's all of them.
And then I'm just going to go, thank you, Sandra. I'm just going to show the last page, which we won't discuss, but just so that people are aware that we've got all the terms that are in this document that might not be shared understanding are there, and then references. So I'm going to close your eyes if you get seasick from this, but I'm going to just whiz back up to this, just the brief overview here, the 7 categories or domains, so we can keep them in our minds as we have our discussion now. And I'm going to open up the conversation to anybody who would like to make a question or comment about any of the content that was presented today, or any question about the implications of this document, the competency standards. So feel free to say anything you like, make any comment you like.
I just want to say bravo, this is amazing work, and it's very exciting to be here and to really go over it in a big group of dance therapists. So I'm really happy and excited. It's a beautiful document. I mean, there's little tweaks, of course, but yeah, thank you for that hard work.
Thank you, Connor.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I think it's important that you...
Excuse me, can you just introduce yourself, and I'll try and make sure that you come up in the picture. Who's speaking now?
Okay, it's Tracy. Tracy Nicholson. I can see you all. I just thought you could see me, sorry.
I'm just going to try and find you on the video so that the recording shows you. Tracy, what hat are you wearing as you make this comment?
First of all, as a professional member of the Dance Therapy Association, that yes, I am very pleased to see this document written. I think it's very clear. I was really pleased to hear Sandra address the issue that seemed to come through the email threads over the last couple of days, which is not specific mention of certain movement analysis techniques and such. So I think it's really important that you add that language in there that says not limited to but inclusive of, because I think any dance movement therapist needs to have these skills, but it doesn't matter what their language is per se, so long as it is able to do what the competencies express. I do have a question. This could be because I wasn't able to join until I did. One of the concerns that came up through the emails was mention of work placement or that sort of thing specifically mentioned. Did any discussion happen of that? Because that would be something I would comment on as a course developer and trainer, that it might be inherent, but I would say it's inherent in any training of any therapist that there is a workplace competency under supervision during training. Whether it needs to be specified as how many hours, I don't know about that, because I have seen in other international professional associations where they have mentioned there has to be so many hours in a course, there have to be so many hours of clinical practice, that can actually take over from the actual course content, because learning isn't always measured by how many hours I sit in a workplace environment, because my supervisor might not be actually very good. So you'd have to be very careful about how that sort of stipulation works.
So can we address that, Tracy? Kim, do you want to? And
thanks, Tracy. Good question, and good. It's a terrific chance to have this discussion. But I'll just mention, for those who are wondering about the email thread, the email thread hasn't included you if you weren't part of it for any other reason except that it was between the training providers. So there's a group of training providers who've been in a conversation this week. So please don't feel that you've missed out on something there if you're not a training provider. But Tracy's point is a good one, in the sense that we, just to be careful about distinguishing this document from two other professional documents or two other professional frameworks, and one of them is the professional membership requirements. So our association has professional membership requirements, which are what we say is the amount and type of training that a dance movement therapist needs to have in order to meet our standards. And those relate to these competencies. So this is what we've come to, the idea that this is the amount of training and the amount of supervision and the amount of professional practice required to get a dance movement therapist competent to do these things. And then another document which we don't have yet, and the new group that Sue Mullane is going to be leading, our Training and Education Committee, will be establishing a set of training standards. And they're distinct from competency standards because they say how a training courses are done and what should be included in training in order to make a dance movement therapist competent in these domains. So that's a difference between these things. In this case, the people in the profession, people employing dance movement therapists, it's not relevant to them how many hours someone spent studying biomechanics. What they need to know is that the dance movement therapist understands how the body works. And then it's up to us to decide, well, how many hours is required to get that, or what is the capacity that we want people to have. So just distinguishing between those three things.
But also, may I add that the practicum component, or this, is again up to the training framework or the training standards, but also it's up to the training program as to how are you going to achieve particularly numbers 4, 5, and 4 and 5, or probably 5 in particular. How are you going to meet all of those competency standards for therapeutic practice? And if it takes 40 hours, okay. If it takes 400 hours, okay. You know, the organization, the professional membership committee, of course, will look for certain standards, but it's whether or not your students can meet the competencies and how you do that workplace placement. So we're not specifying in the competencies those sorts of things.
But what we are specifying in the competency, so it just gives me whizzing down to say 5.
Number 5, yeah.
Is that, for example, this very first one, the ability to initiate and maintain therapeutic relationships. The reason why we have placement in our courses is in order to give the trainee dance movement therapists the practice in doing that in order that they can do this. So what the employer and the client wants to know is that the dance movement therapist can do this. It's not relevant to them how that person learnt it, whether they learnt it from theory or practice, or how many hours they spent in practice. And as Tracy has pointed out, we can spend a lot of hours and not learn very much, or vice versa. But what we need to do is to be able to do these things. And so that's the kind of juncture between training standards, professional membership requirements, and then competency standards. So competency standards matter most to the outside world. What can people expect a dance movement therapist to be able to do? And then as we develop our training and education standards, they will refer to this so that we can recommend to training courses, you need to be thinking about all of these things in order to train people to be competent in these ways. Now, I'm just going to mention it's 7 o'clock. We did start just a few minutes late after our warm-up, so I'm going to take us for 5 more minutes. That will bring us to an hour. But, if you need to go, please do. And then we'll just have the last lot of questions or comments. And Eileen has raised her metaphorical hand. So over to you.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. I've appreciated being able to join tonight and very glad that this is happening. Just a question. I mean, it's so very clear what you've outlined here, and it seems the bottom line is that dance movement therapists should be able to demonstrate applying theory to interventions. What I don't see mentioned anywhere, and I may have missed it, is where we can show the world that we actually know how to apply per population we might be working with. The emphasis in the competencies is mostly on the different skills and theories, and without naming them, but outlining what needs to be there. But I see 5.3.1 in terms of awareness of human diversity, but that does not say to a potential employer that we know how to apply these to the type of population we would be specifically working with: mental health, disability, age, etc. So I'm not saying we need to name those populations, but just wondering if that needs to be more specific somehow. Does that make sense?
I understand.
Yes. We've Kim, do you want to address that?
Well, I guess this is what we were thinking here, Eileen, that is actually what this is about. So in this case, it's about the human diversity for assessment. And then here it's for planning and evaluation. And then also in delivery of service that we're responding to different clients' needs. But one thing that I'm seeing there is we don't say diagnosis. So that would be another possibility that we put in there. Which
well, no, I wouldn't go to the diagnosis word.
No, Kim, we discussed that. We did not want to go down the biomedical model.
No.
So
no, okay, can I rephrase? I think, as Sandra pointed out earlier, the word awareness is not an active verb that I think suits our purposes, and it is used quite a lot through this document. Whereas to say that can apply theory to practice, and other terms that are more active verbs rather than awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't actually see awareness a lot, but I won't argue that at the moment, because we're saying it's utilization of. Okay, so utilizes is the verb, and awareness is the knowledge, and that's the theory and application.
Why not say the word knowledge?
No, it's awareness, but it means that we're utilizing or completing or creating or applying. And when we developed this document, we went back and forth around, well, do we name populations? Do we?
No, I wasn't asking for that. I think the way you've worded that is quite comprehensive and very.
Okay, good. I'm glad you understand.
No. I'm just looking at through the lens of people who are maybe looking at where do we fit in the wider disability and mental health sectors in terms of providing interventions and treatment and things like that, and wanting to know that we can safely do so with, appropriate skill levels, and just felt that utilizing awareness doesn't say it for me that way, but perhaps it does for you.
Okay, well, what I'm going to do now, because our time is up, I'm just going to invite, and I'm grateful for the people who put suggestions in there. If there's anybody who has a question that they haven't had a chance to say, or a suggestion in response to conversations. So Eileen is suggesting that we, rethink the word awareness. And if there's Eileen or anyone else who's got a recommendation they might make about how that could be improved, please feel free to pop it in the group chat there. So we've got some ideas already. And then our conversation is not over tonight. This is a good beginning of this. We will continue to work on that and improve that. So we are doing the best we can to be active in what we are talking about, without at the same time recognising, not expecting too much, because this is beginner level dance movement therapists, and at some other point we'll have competencies for advanced level. Perhaps when we introduce clinical level of membership, we'll have a set of competencies that a clinical member might be expected.
So, and actually that's a good point, because under here 5.7, it's about, a lot of it is about groups, and we don't really address more advanced things such as individual work.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you everyone for your participation in our discussion tonight. To those who've sent questions that have stimulated thinking, and please feel free to continue the discussion either on this chat tonight or by emailing myself or Sandra, and then we can continue. And we've got interesting comment there from Beatrice. So it's terrific to have people,
yeah, it's good,
from other fields to help us to do the best that we can here in making the strongest document we can. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's lovely to have you joining from all around Australasia and possibly other parts of the world as well. And good on you for joining us to learn and develop our profession. And thank you for your thanks as well. Oh, Suzanne, screenshot. Yes, Suzanne suggesting a screenshot. I'm going to just stop the recording at this moment. I can remember how to do that.
I can
stop the recording. Stop the share.
There we go.